Hussein ibn Ali, the Sharif of Mecca and head of the Arab nationalist movement, entered into an alliance with Britain, following a secret exchange of letters with Sir Henry McMahon, the British High Commissioner and effective ruler of Egypt.
The Hashemite family was the only Arab body which cooperated with Britain in the First World War. In return, they sought to re-establish a pan-Arab kingdom throughout the Middle East. Britain dispatched a letter of support, explicitly excluding Christian Lebanon from this kingdom. Reference to Palestine, however, was somewhat ambiguous. The Arabs would claim that it was granted to them, while the British would declare that no such promise was made. This dispute would never have erupted, however, were it not for that other British document, the Balfour Declaration.
In the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, which are 10 letters between 1915 and 1916, the British did promise Sherif Hussein at least sizable parts of what we now call the Arab East, yani Greater Syria plus Palestine, plus, of course, the Arab Peninsula, and what later became Iraq. The man was promised an Arab kingdom and himself as a king of this Arab kingdom.
One possible line of reasoning which led to this British action is explained by the man whose name is most often associated with it, T.E. Lawrence, otherwise known as Lawrence of Arabia.
We could see a new factor was needed in the East, some power or race which would outweigh the Turks in numbers, in output, and in mental activity. Some of us judged that there was latent power enough and to spare in the Arabic peoples, the greatest component of the old Turkish Empire.
British support was important, probably decisive in launching the Arab Revolt and supporting King Hussein. He needed arms and ammunition, and he needed advisors, and he got both. And here where you get important figures like T.E. Lawrence, who was an advisor for the armed forces, because the Arabs at the time didn't have the material power to launch a war against the Turks.
Arab nationalists also supported Sherif Hussein, believing that with British support he would be able to break Ottoman rule. Sherif Hussein began to plan his revolt. The nationalists began to plan for a new government to ensure that they would share power with Hussein, and the British began to plan how to control the Arabs. On the 10th of June 1916, Sherif Hussein declared a war of independence by symbolically firing a rifle at the Turkish barracks in Mecca. The Great Arab Revolt had begun. Prince Faisal, the third son of Sherif Hussein, was in fact the real leader of the Arab Revolt, as his father was too old to fight. Faisal's forces were limited, mainly composed of Bedouin warriors who conducted guerrilla operations, targeting Ottoman supply columns, attacking garrisons, and destroying railroad tracks. To the consternation of the Turks, the Arabs would disappear as suddenly as they appeared, hiding in the maze of the Rum Valley in Jordan. T.E. Lawrence, known as Orenz to the Arabs, is everywhere here. A water spring is named after him, and there is a carving of his head on one of the rock faces next to Prince Abdullah, Sherif Hussein's son and later King of Jordan. Lawrence's main role was to help Prince Faisal plan raids, in line with British strategy. He later wrote about his involvement in the Arab Revolt in a memoir entitled The Seven Pillars of Wisdom, named after a rock formation in the Rum Valley.
The Arabs were portrayed as brave fighters who fight for freedom. They were portrayed as freedom fighters, which was great compared with the image they had retained before as a romantic image or people with black magic, something like that. So now you have the press portray them as freedom fighters who seek to liberate their country and who seek to unite their country. That remained for a while, I mean just for a short while, because after that the image was changed.
A brand new future awaited the Arabs. Unfortunately, it just wasn't the one they were fighting for. In the middle of the war, the British betrayed the Arabs with not one, but two secret agreements. Sykes Picot wasn't the only clandestine agreement made about control of Arab lands. In the Balfour Declaration of 1917, British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour promised Lord Rothschild, a leading British Jew, a homeland for the Jews in Palestine, laying the foundations of the future state of Israel.
ملاحظ أنه في الثورة العربية الكبرى منعت جيوش الثورة العربية الكبرى أن يكون لها دور في فلسطين.
What one notices in the Great Arab Revolt is that the Arab forces were forbidden a role in Palestine. I mean, when British forces arrived in Palestine, they were alone, because they were thinking about the Balfour Declaration. The Arabs discovered this later. The Arabs believed they were allies and were on one path, one fight. But the British planned from the beginning that the Arab kingdom did not include Palestine. That is, Palestine was outside the Arab kingdom deal they made with Sherif Hussein in Mecca.
Sherif Hussein في مكة.
Initially unaware of the betrayals surrounding them, Arab forces celebrated the capture of Aqaba, a strategic port town on the Red Sea, in July 1917.
June 1918. A British ship carrying supplies of gold and rifles to Emir Faisal also bore a distinguished passenger, Dr. Chaim Weizmann. The Zionist leader sought to reach an understanding with a man who then represented the Arab liberation movement. The desert meeting between the two leaders would subsequently lead to the signing of the Weizmann-Faisal Agreement on the Palestine question. On September 19, 1918, the war in Palestine flared up. Hundreds of cannons opened a barrage of hellfire on Turkish positions. The main force then broke through the Jezreel Valley at the historic pass of Megiddo, climbing the Nazareth Hills and proceeding through the Golan Heights towards Damascus. At the same time, a task force was sent to occupy Transjordan. It included the Jewish Legion, comprising volunteers from Britain and from the United States who came to fight as Jews in the battle for liberation of the Promised Land. The Jewish Legion was the first to cross the Jordan River, fighting on the same side as the Arabs, but for different political reasons. The immediate Turkish surrender in Transjordan opened the road northward to Syria.
As the revolt progressed, the Ottomans began to execute independence activists in Beirut and Damascus. But in October 1918, Prince Faisal and Lawrence entered Damascus. The Ottomans fled. The Arabs had won, and the liberation of Syria was received with great celebration. Already proclaimed King of the Arabs the previous year, Sherif Hussein prepared to take the throne. But the Arabs were betrayed yet again, this time from an unexpected quarter.
Sherif Hussein was also betrayed in his own part of the world where the British had promised the Sauds to take over Najd and Hijaz. So not only he was not given an Arab kingdom, but his autonomous rule that was a tradition and accepted by the Ottomans was lost to the tribal coalition of the Sauds, yes, with British help, and he spent his last days in Cyprus, of all places.
The Syrians, or the people, that is the people of Syria, present-day Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan, elected representatives, congressmen, and they all voted for King Faisal to become the king of Syria, which means that there was a will. The people were willing to get rid of the Turks and to get united. They didn't want to replace the Turks by other rulers like the British or the French or the Israelis at a later stage.
أعتقد أن كل التاريخ العربي المعاصر وجد في تلك الفترة يعني.
I believe that all modern Arab history was born at that moment. The Arab countries that exist today are the result of those agreements, including partitions and geographic borders. Countries called Syria, Lebanon, Iraq or Saudi Arabia are all the result of Sykes-Picot. The creation of the Zionist entity is also linked to the Balfour Declaration.
نشأة الكيان الصهيوني أيضا ارتبطت بوجود وعد بلفور.
Sykes-Picot and Balfour have left a very deep effects on the region. I mean, in addition to partitioning the region, it has created a set of regimes mainly based on ethnic or tribal or sectarian divisions.
Prince Faisal was well aware of the tribal and sectarian divisions of the Arab world, and he had no problem recognizing the rights of Arab minorities, as long as he could bring them together in a single, united Arab kingdom.
His vision was quite pragmatic, if you want. He was ready within his kingdom to accept an autonomous Christian zone in Mount Lebanon. He proposed the same scheme for the Jews in Palestine. And within this general Arab state, there would be a special region in Palestine which would be a Jewish entity.
In early 1919, negotiations took place between Prince Faisal and Chaim Weizmann, a prominent Russian Jew who was head of the Zionist organization at the Paris Peace Conference, which was held by the Allies to negotiate the spoils of World War I.
To improve his political standing, Faisal conferred with Weizmann and signed an agreement of cooperation with him, relinquishing his claim to Palestine and consenting that it be granted to the Jews. Faisal did not sign this document wholeheartedly. At the last minute, he added a certain reservation in his own handwriting, namely, on condition that the Arabs gain their independence, else I will not consider myself bound by a single word of this agreement.
If the Arab kingdom became a reality, Prince Faisal promised that he would find a place for the Jews in the United Kingdom. But if the Arabs were not given their independence and a United Kingdom, then the promise was null and void.
None of it mattered. At the same conference where Faisal and Weizmann signed their agreement, the Europeans prepared to openly take control of the former Ottoman territories. In July 1920, French forces defeated Faisal's new army at Maysalun and entered Damascus. The Arabs were once again under foreign domination. And for the first time, Arabs had to contend with national borders, which had never existed, even under Ottoman colonialism.
Faisal returned to Damascus empty-handed. When the news came that the French intended to expel Faisal from Syria, as he was too pro-British for their tastes, his Syrian and Palestinian supporters decided to launch a struggle. Excitement ran high in Jerusalem as well. In 1920, as the Nebi Musa festival procession left the Temple Mount, cries of "Long live King Faisal" and "Death to the Jews" could be heard. Suddenly the Arabs began to attack the Jews. The Nebi Musa riots of 1920 were the first violent Arab attack on Zionism. 7 Jews were killed and 200 wounded. The world cared little about events in Damascus and Jerusalem. 3 weeks later, the Allies convened a conference in the city of San Remo on the Italian Riviera. Here, representatives of the great powers were to sign an agreement for partition of the Middle East. France received the mandate for all Syria and Lebanon, and immediately expelled the pro-British Faisal from Damascus. Britain was granted mandates over Iraq and Palestine, compensating Faisal for his expulsion from Syria by crowning him king of Iraq. Palestine, which then extended over both sides of the Jordan River, was set aside as a national home for the Jews.
I think it was the first overt step of, at that time, putting an end to Arab dreams of unity with Damascus as the capital, reviving the glory of the Umayyads and so on. Yes, I think it was a very, very crucial event. Perhaps from then on it became not a political problem, but political problems with particular problems in each sector of the Arab world. It was the beginning of fragmentation, if you want.
The dream for Arab nationalists of unity and Sherif Hussein's vision of a united Arab kingdom ruled by an Arab caliph, a descendant of the Prophet, lay in ruins. But unbeknownst to either the Arabs or the colonists, the end of the First World War was also the beginning of the end of old world empires. New and powerful ideologies were on the rise, set to change the world forever.
Establish a pan-Arab kingdom throughout the Middle East. Britain dispatched a letter of support, explicitly excluding Christian Lebanon from this kingdom. Reference to Palestine, however, was somewhat ambiguous. The Arabs would claim that it was granted to them, while the British would declare that no such promise was made. This dispute would never have erupted, however, were it not for that other British document, the Balfour Declaration.
In the McMahon-Hussein correspondence,
Hussein ibn Ali, the Sharif of Mecca and head of the Arab nationalist movement, entered into an alliance with Britain, following a secret exchange of letters with Sir Henry McMahon, the British High Commissioner and effective ruler of Egypt.
The Hashemite family was the only Arab body which cooperated with Britain in the First World War. In return, they sought to reestablish
power enough and to spare in the Arabic peoples, the greatest component of the old Turkish Empire.
British support was important, probably decisive in launching the Arab Revolt and supporting King Hussein. He needed arms and ammunition, and he needed advisors, and he got both. And here we...
correspondence, which are 10 letters between 1915 and 1916, the British did promise Sherif Hussein at least sizable parts of what we now call the Arab East, Greater Syria plus Palestine, plus of course the Arab Peninsula, and what later became Iraq. The man was promised an Arab kingdom and himself as a king of this Arab kingdom.
One possible line of reasoning which led to this British action is explained by the man whose name is most often associated with it, T.E. Lawrence, otherwise known as Lawrence of Arabia.
We could see a new factor was needed in the East, some power or race which would outweigh the Turks in numbers, in output, and in mental activity. Some of us judged that there was latent